Hello friends, how's it going? Happy Thursday and happy sketch session day. I hope you had a really good day and I hope you are ready to put your pencils to use. Okay, good. I'm seeing myself on both screens. If you were here earlier and you saw, well, this is supposed to start at 6:30, where the hell's Carolyn? And nobody was coming. My apologies. When I set up the session, I must have clicked 6:30 instead of the usual 7:30. Not sure how that happened. So sorry about that, but I'm ready now. I'm prepared for our sketch session and I hope that you are as well. If you're new here, like if you're live with us for the first time, or if you're catching the recording and you're taking a look for the very first time, let me introduce myself. My name is Carolyn Peters, and I'm the owner of Cura Studios, where I teach traditional drawing techniques and skills so artists have a super solid footing to explore their creative voices from. And in line with what I teach at Cura Studios, I offer these weekly live sketch sessions. And the best way of describing them is that they're the mix up, the baby between a workout in which you work out your drawing skill set and your play session, where you just kind of get to tune everything out, let loose, and just have fun and play. And so as we dive into our drawings tonight, check in with yourself. What do you need? Are you like focused and energized and ready to work hard and have more of a workout session where you strengthen some skills? Or do you need to fill your well back up and kind of decompress, and maybe you just need to keep it a little bit mellow? In that case, I encourage you to kind of just see this as a play session, not so much as a let's work hard session. So you pick what's right for you tonight, and at any point in time you can just turn off what like you can just put me on mute and you can just draw in whichever way you want, unless of course you're following along the lesson. With these sketch sessions, we rotate subject matter every week, and we rotate focus. So subject matter this week, we're on inanimate objects. And so I picked mushrooms for tonight. And hello, so good to see you guys in the chat. And the reason why I picked mushrooms is because the focus I wanted to bring to tonight is, how do we give our drawings a more robust sense of form? As in, how do we make our drawings look more three-dimensional? That's the focus tonight. Again, if you don't want to work with that focus, you just put me on mute and you just draw the mushrooms in whichever way you want. I have some beautiful imagery from my neighbor who grows his own mushrooms, and he's a photographer, so they're pretty pictures. All right, so let's dive into the lesson, shall we? In order to give your drawings more form, there are a couple of things that I recommend you do. We usually think, in order to make things look more convincing, that they need more details. And that's rarely the case. In fact, if we want our drawings to look more round, more three-dimensional, it's always perspective or construction, the 3D construction, that's the culprit, or that's the thing that the artist doesn't understand. So we want to practice this tonight. So to begin with, you want to understand that anything around you, whether it is a bottle or a lamp or a person, everything is an amalgamation of simple forms that are fused together into more complex forms. So what I mean by that, by simple forms, I mean things like this: cylinders, balls or spheres, cones, and the last one is over here, boxes, and of course there are pyramids as well. But those are the main forms that you have to start to master. And so what you want to practice is, if you look at any given object, you want to practice seeing the segments. Okay, this bottle, let's talk about this bottle. This top segment here is a portion of a sphere, like just a little segment. Then this big portion is a whole cylinder. And then here's another portion of a cylinder. And then I have a portion of a cone. So we want to practice disassembling more complex items into their sub-segments. And then we want to decide these sub-segments. Is it a cone? Is it a portion of a cone? Is it a sphere? Is it a segment of a sphere? Is it a part of a box, etc.? So that's the first thing, kind of dissecting things into their sub-segments. We want to also, for every segment, we want to have a really solid shape. And with every shape comes an axis. I'll talk about this more when we draw, so you'll actually see what I mean by that. But we need this axis because the axis will tell us, okay, is this bottle upright? So the axis would, go a rod that's driving straight through. It's upright, or is it leaning? So the axis might be like this, or the axis might be leaning this way. So every segment has its own axis, and we need this axis because it will help us understand the 3D orientation later on as well. Because let's think this through. If you have a cylindrical thing, you pretend you have an axis running through it. First, you want to determine, is there a lean left or right, right? That's the 2D orientation. But then you want to figure out, what's the 3D orientation? If it's leaning at me, something changes here. If it's leaning away from me, I see now a different curve. So first we dissect things into their segments. Then we build good shapes and become aware of the axis of each individual shape. Third, then we use that axis to figure out, is this leaning at me or leaning away from me? Then the next phase is we focus on understanding how much things are turned away. And for this, I'm going to switch my camera because I have something drawn out for you that'll make it a little bit more apparent. So let me switch on over. Alrighty. So here we go. Let's see if I'm zoomed in enough. Yes, I am. Okay, so as I said, our simple forms are cylinder, cone, box, pyramid, and of course a sphere. Every single thing has an axis running through it, and we need to be aware of the left to right orientation of this axis, but also, is this angling at me or away? Now here is the thing that confuses most people. I'm going to get this really close. Refocus this, because what we're usually wondering about is, well, how do I curve the edge of my ellipses, right? So you want to be aware of your center of vision. If something lines up with your center of vision, it looks straight. If it starts to move left of your center of vision just a little bit, it starts to curve to the left. If you move it even more center of vision, it curves even more. You see how this is a deeper opening than this? And then the same, of course, goes for if you turn right from center of vision. Narrower, bigger, but the arc turns right. So the thought experiment here is, what happens if we slice through our mushroom at the point where the forms intersect? So with a mushroom, we'll have a part of a dome for the top, we'll have a part of a cylinder for the middle, and then we'll have a smaller, narrower cylinder for the stem. And so we are always interested in these connection points. Where does the dome portion connect with the cylinder portion, and how do I curve that line? So of course, coming back to this thing over here, if you're looking at things turning left and right center of vision, that's one thing, but of course it also holds true for above eye level and below eye level. So if you have something that's above your eye level, the arc will arc up. If you have something below eye level, the arc of your ellipse will arc down. And the more you go above your eye level, the bigger this arc gets. The lower you go below your eye level, the bigger this downward arc gets. So the takeaway for now is the more extreme the tilt at you or the tilt away from you is, the deeper your arcs get. Right, that's exactly it. So the arcs get bigger when it turns away more extreme. So this is just, I want to make sure that you have seen this because this is something you'll want to, this insight you'll want to draw from as we draw. And I'll of course explain much more as we're actually drawing these mushrooms and kind of tell you why this stuff is important and so forth. So let me hit play on this mushroom. So these are timed, and usually you can see the time frame, how much time you have left. So here we go, and I'm beginning, just hold on a second, setting these forms down. I'm beginning with graphite, but later I'll play with some dipping pen and ink just because it makes me happy. But you draw with whatever makes you happy. So here we go. So I draw always in phases. Phase 1 is the gesture blob phase. Gesture blob phase determines how big I want my drawing to be and where I want my drawing to be on the page. And also determines the character. And once I have that, I get into my structure phase. And the structure phase begins with a good shape. And once I have a good shape, I get into the 3D construction. And then I end my drawing process with a finishing phase. And that is where I decide where do I put detail? Where do I want people to look? What kind of a style do I want to use? So here I have now my shapes. So now that I have my shapes, I do what I was saying earlier. I'm looking at the sub-segments. So I'm basically thinking, how is this thing fused together? So I'm saying the top portion is portion of a dome. Then I kind of have a portion of a cylinder. Then I have another segment of a dome. See, like, let me scoot this over so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So if I have a sphere and I sliced through here, this is the segment I'm referring to over here. And then of course I have the stem. Let me make sure this is focused. And my stem is a cylinder. So at this point here, I've deconstructed the sub-segments into shapes, right? So this is not three-dimensional yet. So now I'm thinking, okay, how can I turn this into form? And so now I'm thinking about, okay, what's the perspective of this? I'm looking down on this mushroom. How do I know this? Because what's happening here? See this arc? This is the kind of arc that we get when we look down on something. It's like kind of a U or a bowl-shaped kind of an arc. So now I'm going to round these guys out into true ellipses. Whew, 3 minutes is short. That's okay. These first few shorter poses are warm-up. So here on this one, I'm going to pick, if you can see the mouse, I'm going to pick these top two. And before I start the drawing, you can see how flat this line is. So this is at eye level. So at eye level, a round form looks straight. If you put it above eye level, it starts to open up this way. If you put it below eye level, it starts to curve down the other way. So being aware of your eye level is super helpful. So when I do my gesture, I draw lightly, I draw loosely. So now I have my dome part here. Another segment here. And then I have the rim. For the stem, I'm being mindful, how does it change direction? So I'm becoming interested in my subsegments here. So yes, this is all cylindrical, but there's segments for this stem, and every segment has its own axis. And with this axis, I'll be able to figure out what the 3D orientation of the stem is. And when we draw these ellipses, we're always interested in the edge that's closest to us. That's the edge you want to emphasize, and that's what's going to translate the 3D element, 3D aspect of this drawing to whoever is looking. So again, with the stem, I pay attention to the subsegments. So this is pretty straightforward, just kind of like a cylindrical dome. I don't need to do a lot of deconstruction for the actual hats or caps. But then for the stem, it's useful to think about, okay, where does that change direction? Every segment has its own central axis. And then we can snap imaginary rubber bands around these center axes. And so the reason why I'm interested in the center axis is because when I snap these elliptical rubber bands around, I want to make sure that they're perpendicular. So what does perpendicular mean? It means 90 degrees instead of this. This is slanted. We don't want to have this. This is what we want to have. Okay, so 4 minutes on this beauty. So now we're looking down. Perspective is downward. I have this heater next to me and it's frying my leg off. I had to just turn that down. Yes, so a lot of this is repeat and reinforcement of some of the previous lessons. I did one on cross contour, so you'll recognize a lot of those insights from the cross contour lesson. But the thing that we're doing today is we're kind of deconstructing things more. So very similar, they kind of build on top of each other. Okay, so at this phase, I have my gesture. Oops, let me scoot it over so it's in the picture. And now I'm gonna get a bit more specific about the shape. To get better shapes, I break things into angles. It allows me to see the big picture better. But knowing that I only have 4 minutes, I don't want to dilly-dally too much. Okay, so let's talk about what is the form of this. Aside from the stem we know, right? The stem is a long cylinder, it's kind of bendy. But the form of this, it's basically a pancake. Did we have that in our form assortment? So a pancake is essentially a slice of a cylinder. except that it's not a perfect cylinder. It's a cylinder that kind of dips down. But the important part is this thickness here, and that we translate the fact that we have a top plane and a side plane. And this kind of looks like a steak almost right now. And then we can also talk about that it dips in, and for that cross contours would be perfect, and having our center axis is also useful here. So to translate this form, we're interested in the plane change. So what the hell is a plane change? This here's the plane change, where the top plane changes and becomes the side plane. So yes, the little, I don't know what they're called, the little striation thingies underneath, they're interesting, and they're interesting detail, and they're interesting texture, but they're not going to make your drawing look more three-dimensional. They're going to add interest later on in the finishing phase, but that's not tonight's lesson. So here, if I get to the stem, I'm now kind of deconstructing the stem into the cylinder that's leaning this way with its axis this way, and the cylinder that's leaning this way, the axis going this way. And so if I want to now use this insight from this deconstruction, I can piggyback on that previous lesson and use, let me see, where's the shadow? There's no distinct shadow. Use one of these to kind of keep repeating a cross contour. All right, let's try our hand at this beauty. Got 5 minutes on this one. Beginning with the gesture, I mean, you know, the reason why I picked mushrooms tonight is because some of them are just so simple, and they really are just great at getting your feet wet in deconstruction drawing. So we call this way of drawing, where I'm kind of disassembling everything right now and putting it back together, this is called deconstruction. 3D as well as 2D if necessary, deconstruction. Okay, so what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a, flat, what is it called? Cone. And then we're dealing with a small segment. And you can argue here, you can either say the small segment of a cylinder or a small segment of a sphere. But those are the two parts. Then the next portion is the stem, and the stem is a cylinder, of course, again. But there is, if you notice right here underneath, so I don't know what your name is. Your handle is Nope WMMV. It seems like you know a lot about mushrooms, so I don't know what that thing is called, that kind of neck collar thing that it has. If it has a name, do tell. But this is kind of arranged almost in like an inverted cone, like this. So now, you know what I said earlier, we're interested in these areas where the forms fuse. We're interested in where does that cone fuse with the portion of the sphere, and because that's where we're gonna find our plane change. So our tendency is when we draw, and we're not educated about drawing, annulus ring, oh, interesting. See, I'm learning stuff too tonight. So what our tendency is when we don't know what we're doing when we're drawing is we would just kind of copy the outlines and then we're going to draw the stem, and then we notice that it has spots, and then we do that, and then we wonder why it doesn't look three-dimensional. And it's because you have to draw these parts that aren't necessarily visible, right? So this is called a plane change, and that's what we need. So I'm also looking at this ring. I notice that it's kind of arranged in this almost flaring out manner. And then I arrange those sub-details on that ring. But I'm paying close attention that the tips, that they land on that ellipse that I established. So see, I have that ellipse, and I'm making sure that these tips, they're somewhat kind of touching down on that. So that reinforces again the idea of this being, you know, a trustworthy form. Because the thing is, we call bullshit on drawings very quickly if they don't have an understanding of form. Like, yes, you can kind of fudge your way past some people with some shading tricks, but if you don't know about plane changes and arranging your things, your details in perspective, then it's hard to hide that. Okay, so then now the other thing you can do is, now that you're understanding, okay, this is my, I'm looking down, so I have this downward bowl-like curve. Now you can play with the details you're seeing, if you have time, and arrange the details in line with these cross contours. Of course, you can add variation, but like that, you're kind of subconsciously reinforcing the idea that this is the perspective, this is the form. Okay, I can move this over and draw these guys over here. Beginning with my gesture. Again, gesture is blobs. Blobs don't have to be specific. They just need to stake a piece of paper, stake their claim on in which part of the paper they want to live on, how big they want to be. And if they can look a little bit like the thing you're drawing, if they can capture the essence, even better. But I like to take the pressure off. Like, you know, if all you have to manage in the first minute or so is decide how big it is and where on the page it is, like, that's manageable, you know? Okay. Now, and this is where photographs are limiting. You know, this is where drawing from life is truly the best, because you can actually take the thing in your hand and turn it and like understand it better. You know, from a photograph, you often have to guess like what the forms are. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to go with, again, a flat, super flat portion of a dome. At the top part, and then a middle segment of a sphere. But of course, we're not so generic. We're gonna make this more true life and kick it out here a little bit. Make this deeper. And again, I'm always interested in the edge that's closest to me. And then for the stem, the axis of this stem is like this. And it's hard to tell for me if the axis runs all the way or if the axis changes here to this. Let's pretend like it changes like this. You want to think about, or a useful way of thinking about this is, imagine there's a slinky around the stem of the mushroom, which way would the slinky ring start to change as you're going down? Okay. So when you use these plane changes where this form meets that form, you can just go with the actual plane change, or you can be a little bit more ninja about it and do this kind of thing. Like, I just thought of this. Like, it's almost like you're stitching the two together. Like you're making a Frankenstein thing out of it. Yeah, I wish I actually had a slinky. I keep telling my students about it. And then like whenever I tell them, I'm kind of making a mental note to say, hey, Carolyn, pick one up in the toy store. And then of course I forget. But one of these days I'll actually buy a slinky so I can make that point visually as well. Okay, so you see, I didn't draw this actual line, but I alluded to it by going cross contour over it. And let's get to the stem. Again, I'm looking down on this thing, but it's leaning away from me. So I'm not quite sure yet if I need to do it this way or the other way, but this seems to translate well enough. So with art, there are often multiple answers that will be accurate or that will be convincing. So you test out what seems to look right, and then you go with a version that seems right to you. Kija, were you just doing the kind of stitching like this thing? Is that what you're saying? Okay, hold on. I need some paper. Hold on, let me clip this. I should have added a few more pages. Okay, so we have 11 minutes for this one. Okay, you should be seeing most of it. All right, so decide what you can do with 11 minutes. Decide what you want to focus on with 11 minutes. I'm gonna go for the 3 on the right, the big 3 on the right. Blob number 1, blob number 2, blob number 3. Yes, they are edible. I forget what they're called though. Paul, if you're here, you can enlighten us. Paul is my neighbor. He grows these. Okay, so just deciding my placement, my scale, their overall shape. Now let's get a little bit more specific. King Oyster sounds about right. I think I've heard him say this name. I think actually I have some in the fridge. So notice how I'm using straight angles when I want to become more specific about my shapes. It's not, the straight angles are not meant to be the end result. I'll always go back over them and round them out if I'm doing a finished drawing. Remember, these are just practice drawings. Okay, this is going to be interesting because this dips down. This is going to be a challenge for me too. Okay, so what are we dealing with? We're dealing with an inverted cone. We're not getting a super deep perspective on the top brim, but then this is what's happening. I'm gonna try my hand at this. I'm not the most technical person, and I don't like having to think technically, but when it comes to drawing, I'll bite the bullet every once in a while. If this was anything else but drawing, you'd see me running. So this is what we're dealing with. So we have this rim, and I'm going to bring this even lower so it's easier to see. I'm going to make this dark. So this is our plane change here, this edge. And then here we have another plane change. It's a plane change where this starts to dip in significantly. There's a dip in. Dip in. Oop. So if you had an and running down, that and would disappear from sight. Right here. You see? And then here, here, here. See, so this is what's happening in here in terms of form. And then we have, oh, let's go back over here. So then again here, this is where you have the cone fuse with the cylinder. So this is another one. Anytime you have form segments fuse, you want to address that part, whether you address it with an actual ring or whether you address that area with this kind of more length cross contour treatment. Yeah, it's actually, you know, as I said, I'm not the kind of person who delights in putting like technical puzzles together, or like, you know, if I have to assemble something, like I let my husband do that. But like, it's, to me, it's interesting how nature is built, and whether the nature is man-made or nature-made, and I have to draw it, then I'm interested, you know. So, okay, I'm gonna just change into my dipping pen. Just, I don't have to play. So I'm going to play with both the contours, the plane changes that I've figured out through my deconstruction, and then some cross contours. And yes, I fully admit it, when I work in pen and ink and it's not just kind of gestural, sketchy kind of a drawing, I want a more finished drawing, I will do an underdrawing in graphite, and I'm not ashamed to say it. So if you like working with a nib, oops, the dipping pen, the only thing that I would recommend is that you make sure it's actually a drawing nib instead of a calligraphy nib. There are other nibs, there are cartooning nibs. The problem with cartooning and calligraphy nibs is that they're only meant to be pulled. Whereas with a drawing nib, we can go this way and this way. I can push and pull. And whereas with a calligraphy nib, you can only pull. Also is the thing with calligraphy nibs and cartooning nibs is they're meant to produce uniform lines. And if you want to vary your line weight, then you need a drawing nib for that. If you don't already have it, and you want to know more about pen and ink tools, which ones do what really well, which ones don't do certain things that good, and you are not on my email list, get on my email list, and as a welcome gift, you'll get a free tool guide on pen and ink tools. It's 11 pages. It'll tell you the main difference you need to look out for when you use pen and ink tools. There are even little shopping lists for pen and ink drawing kits you can take to the art supply store. Okay. Yeah, so when I get into the more, like, let's put a finish onto the drawing phase of the drawing, that's when I switch to holding whatever tool I'm drawing with more like I'm writing my name. And in the beginning, I'll hold my tool in an overhand grip, because I'll want to use my entire arm. I don't want to just use my knuckles. But for the smaller turns in the contour, I want to have that control. All right, next set, another 11 minutes. So this one we have a very extreme underneath view. Let me just pull this over a little bit. My pen down. And so for these drawings, you know, don't let yourself get frustrated with them. They're, as I said, it's a workout session, it's a play session. Like, this is not art. This is just getting better. This is decompressing. It'll inform your art, of course, you know. So we're not doing it just for no reason. But this is not the product. And I'll say it every time you're here with me. You may be sick and tired of me repeating this, but I truly believe that it's so important that we look at art as a practice and not always as a performance. We get so easily frustrated if we put that pressure of it needing to be frame-worthy every single time on our drawings, and that makes it harder to come back to the drawings. So let's not do that. Let's have drawing sessions where it's just about moving the pencil, the pen, whatever it is, and celebrate just the fact that we did that. Okay, so gesture, I'm looking at the kind of big arrangement of this thing. And just like most of these, they're fairly simple. But again, now we have this more upshot. Right, so what we're practicing, or what I am practicing in these sketch sessions, is a certain skill. Like tonight, the skill is deconstructing things, understanding things three-dimensionally. But I'm not doing this because I'm hoping that I can take these mushroom drawings and then put a frame around them. I'm doing this because I know that if I practice it, just like if I went to the gym and I did a bunch of sit-ups, I would be strengthening my abs. These mushroom drawings are strengthening my ability to deconstruct things. So next time I do want to create a frame-worthy piece, I'm prepared. But I think we often just decide that we need everything to be frame-worthy, because otherwise you can't call ourselves an artist, and I think that's just bullshit. Okay, so let's look at the direction changes of the stem. Again, I'm thinking about the axis of this stem piece, the axis of that stem piece. How do the ellipses arrange? I'm going to try something. I'm going to try flipping this down, because it's going so deep away from me. The other thing, when I do these deconstruction drawings, I'll treat the items as if they're see-through, as if they're made out of glass, and I'm drawing every edge of them. I'm not only drawing the things, the parts, the edges that I see, I'm also drawing the parts that I know are on the other side. And that is, in my opinion, true draftsmanship, true ability to draw. Because copying, copying is our starting point. This is usually where we build our love for drawing. But it has its limits. We don't want to just copy, we want to be able to understand and translate. So here's one more, and then here it changes direction. This is really going away from me, like this. I'm gonna make this flat actually. So yeah, and as you're imagining like what things look, if they're see-through, I'm always interested in the attachment points. Like what would it look like if I kind of took this little stem off, and what would that surface look like where the stem attaches to this underside of the cap? So these stems, these are really interesting because they change their direction so strongly. So let's see, I'm looking up at these here. These are more at eye level. See how flat this one is here? So these definitely arc up, also because they are kind of exaggerated there. But these are more flat here. Let's still treat this one as if it's me looking up at it. And then here, the stem changes direction. So here, So the cross section is what I'm interested in. The cross section would look like this. And then here, it's more like this. So if you practice figure drawing and you've taken like a classical figure drawing class, there's always a deconstruction lesson hopefully in the mix. And so you'll often end up drawing the figure in this kind of robotic looking way where it's just like a mannequinization of the figure. And so right now I'm basically doing that, but with the mushrooms. Like I'm drawing a mannequin version, a more robo version of these mushroom stems. And again, because then I can use these little arcs and repeat them to create cross contours, or I can draw cross contours lengthwise to indicate that direction change. So another good practice is as you're doing this kind of deconstruction, becoming aware of these attachment points, think about the center too. Like I'm drawing a little dot and the center is always where the axis is. And then if you wanted to get like in the detail phase to, I don't know the English word, I only know the German word. In German we call them Lamellen, these little things underneath, these lines underneath. I forget, you said it earlier. Then we organize them and we let them run to the center. And that makes sense. As we get towards the center of vision, they straighten out. We get right to the right of the center of vision. They go right. Like you can think of an umbrella, kind of like that. And they end here. See? And so not only is it cool to know how to deconstruct your stuff into the sub-elements, but it actually helps you in your finishing phase. Because if the finishing phase includes these striations, then they're organized, they'll reinforce the form that you're trying to build. Let's do this one here. So in terms of using the dipping pen, on areas where you have a lot of light, that's a good place to kind of break the line of your pen. And then on areas where you have more shadow, you can keep the line more solid. This is more like a contouring tip. I know we're not focusing on contours tonight, but what the hell. Bonus tip. So you see, I figured out the attachment point, that if I wanted to finish this and not have these weird geometric lines everywhere, I would then come to the spot, make sure I have ink on my pen, and then, well, I'm gonna go back for just a second because I wanna finish my point here. Let's pause this for a second. And then connect with these little striations along this elliptical path that I've plotted out by doing this. So no, I'm not leaving this in my drawing. I'm alluding to this by how I bring the details to it. And then, I can pick up my contour here, pick Pick up my contour here. Take out this deconstruction. So again, the deconstruction is just a tool. It's just a tool to understand it accurately. And then once you get it, you use portions of it if they're useful, or you let it go. See? And then what I was doing over here, I could say I want to draw attention to this area. It's going to be a focal point. So to build a focal point, now I'm going to bring these details in, etc. Okay, so I think we have one more. The last one is a 15-minute image with multiple mushrooms, so knock yourself out. Pick the ones that you think are prettiest. Let me get a fresh sheet of paper. Oops. Take this over here. Scoot this. Okay, so let me scoot this over. Okay, and then I'm gonna get just a tad smaller so we have all of them in there, the whole pretty bunch. There. Take your pick. Okay, and is it playing? Yes, it's playing. All right, last 15 minutes. Which ones do I want to do? I'm gonna go for the left ones. So again, in my gesture phase, which I also call the blob phase, I'm just roughly giving myself a scale, a placement, and the overall idea. If there are multiple things, this is also when I will put them into context to each other, saying this one is big, this one is smaller, this one is a little bit higher up, this one is a bit lower. This is how far they are apart from each other. I use curvy lines for this portion of the drawing. Okay, then I switch into the second portion, which is shape. Let me scoot this over and focus. So in this shape phase, even though the shape phase I'm treating with the flat silhouette quality of the drawing, it's already interesting to me because I can already tell where the direction changes are happening. And when I have a direction change, I have a form change, right? So I go from cone to cylinder slash sphere portion. And so I'm already paying attention to that. I already want to be clear. And that's why those straight angles are so useful. So of course, before this sketch session is over, we have to take a poll of, and I understand like if you're drawing and if you don't want to stop to type, then that's totally cool. But do you like mushrooms? As in, like, is this something that you actually eat, or do you have a total aversion? Because I know that there are a lot of people who absolutely hate anything to do with mushrooms, and you know, then there's the rest who love them. So what's the pulse of the room? Do we love mushrooms on pizzas and whatnot, or do we hate them? So in this last drawing, I'll allow myself to kind of hop into the inking phase a little bit sooner, but any choices I make with my ink, I'll explain why I do what I do, especially if it has to do with the form. Okay, so, okay, good. I'm not the only one who likes eating mushrooms. That makes me happy. I think it's a texture thing often, especially like with kids, you know, like because they can get pretty slimy. So that definitely can weird you out. Oh, I did not know that there's a difference. As I said, I'm learning so much. Okay, so let me think about, so I already broke this one apart. This one, how am I gonna deal with that? I'm gonna go with like a super flat dome portion. Oh, that's so interesting. Keisha, I was looking at your comment, and then my drawing brain kind of pulled me aside. That's so interesting that that is more of an American thing. Okay, so let's get into some dipping ink. So since I am right-handed, I try to begin on the left side of my drawing and then move over to the right with the dipping pen. Otherwise, I'll smear. So right around here is a plane change, like it kind of dips down. So here's another way of thinking about the form of redrawing. And I know, yes, it all harkens back to cross contour. Cross contour is a big deal, shouldn't be overlooked. We can think about it as a topographical map. Where are the peaks and where are the valleys? How does it dip down? So one of my absolute favorite mushrooms are chanterelles, and where I grew up, and there's chanterelle season. We call them pfifferlinge, and you have them with bread dumplings and cream sauce with parsley, lots of parsley in them. And I miss that. Like, that's one of the things that's really hard to come by in the States. Okay, so now I'm thinking about the stem. What kind of information do I want in the stem? And so I think it's just leaning left. I don't think it's pitching away from me, and I don't think it's pitching at me. So I'm just gonna go with a straightforward cross contour like this. And just to imply the darkness, I just go straight, like that little kind of cast shadow underneath. Yeah, see, that's a cool thing about really getting how you can use line to draw rather than just shading. Like being clear about overlaps, like this line is in front of that line. You can do so much with so little. And it's so easy to kind of underestimate, like you were saying earlier, you're talking about Calvin and Hobbes, like, you know, it's so easy to underestimate or kind of look down on these quote unquote simple cartoons, but it's actually the hard stuff, like, because you need to know what you can leave out and still have it read. So again, here's that fusion point between cone and sphere segment. That's where I'm going to place my lines. So you don't need lines everywhere. You just need them in the right places. So again, here, where I'm currently drawing, it's another joint on the stem, right? Here you're saying earlier it's an elbow. So you can think of it as such, but like when I put these little lines where that fusion place is happening down, I'm making sure it arranges on that kind of elliptical path, because if I make it straight, it's gonna cancel out my form. So sometimes we want to draw it a little bit different from what we see. That of course brings the whole issue, like when do I draw what I see, and when do I exaggerate something, when do I leave it out, and that is where, you know, it becomes art. Like the choices you make makes it art. If you just copy it the way you see it, you know, you're copying, and that's fine, but you'll want to get to a place where you'll know, if I arrange my details in such a way, my details will kind of hoodwink people into believing that this is three-dimensional. And all I did is put some dots on there. So I'm pretending like this has little dots, a little dot skirt. That little dot skirt kind of reinforces, oh, this is three-dimensional. But my daughter, if she saw it all, she would see like, oh, it's so cute, it's decorated, it has gemstones on it. Yes, but did you also know that you now believe that this is round, sweet child? don't know, I went to a very traditional fine arts school, where we learned all those traditional techniques, and we learned also that art history, various art history elements, and you know, like we learned about modernism and postmodernism, and one of the debates was about, you know, like how the art of the past is like tricking people to believe that this like illusion on the canvas is real, and we want like real art that doesn't fool people. And of course an image is gonna trick people into believing that it's an alternate reality. I mean, that's storytelling. Like, what's wrong with storytelling? Sure, if you don't like storytelling, then, you know, pick a different medium. But I always thought that was funny. It's like, really, people didn't know that the painting was a painting? Like, you had to start a whole new movement around it, saying, oh, we're not gonna fool people, we're gonna let paint be paint. We're not trying to trick them into believing this is reality. Anyways. Oh, I was just wondering, I wonder how much longer I have on this. Oh, I wonder if I put an end screen on my movie tonight. Like, because usually, you know, I end the reference with a thank you for drawing with us screen, but I didn't put that into tonight's movie. So we're already done. The hour's over. You sweated long enough. So let me just finish this and I'll switch over and say goodbye and remind you of your lesson. All right, so let's switch this over. Well, I hope you had a good time. I hope you found something in there that was worth your time, that was new and helpful, or a good reminder that you needed to hear. And if not, I hope that at least you had fun looking at those beautiful mushrooms, and I would love to see what you came up with. So if you want to share something, tag me. I'm on Instagram at Cura Studios. I always love to give you that virtual high five, kind of cheering you on that you drew tonight, because it makes me happy that, you know, it wasn't just me. But to wrap the lesson back up, point number one is you want to get really good at seeing the different parts, the different segments that make up more complex forms. And start simple, like with mushrooms, where you just have two forms, cylinders and cones, maybe a few sphere segments thrown in there, and then you can ramp up from there and kind of go a little bit more elaborate, like, you know, animals. They're much more intense because you'll have boxes in there as well and stuff like that. So become aware of the segments. Then become aware of each segment's axis and determine the 3D orientation, leaning away from me, leaning toward me, leaning left or leaning right away from me, and how much so? How much do you need to curve that arc of the ellipse, or how flat does it need to be? We're always interested in those connection points between those segments. That's where you can either put the actual ellipse, or you can put those cross-stitch, cross-contour sections to fuse those two back together. And then another reason why we do this deconstruction work is because we seek out those connection points, those plane changes. And if we have any details, we arrange them parallel or like kind of concentric with those plane changes and those elements that we kind of teased out in the deconstruction. So it's not just you know, because it's interesting to know how to do, but it's because the finish that you want to put on later on is now organized and now helps trick people into believing that your drawing is three-dimensional and not just this flat thing. So Anyways, that's all I have for you tonight. Next week we'll be back to figure drawing, and not quite sure yet what we'll focus on. If you have, not suggestion, if you have requests, that's the word I was looking for, let me know. And again, if you're not on the email list yet, put your name down in that form. There's a link in the description below. You'll get that pen and ink tool guide, and you'll get weekly emails from me kind of giving you some anecdotal stories, keeping you on your drawing path, and I'll chat with you like we're best friends, and you'll never miss one of the sketch sessions, and you'll be first to know about my upcoming online class, the Daily Sketchbook. So I'll see you next week, hopefully. Hope you had a good time, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.